So welcome everybody to the Acoustics Research Seminar at Salford, or virtually. And today we have another external speaker, Dr. Sarab Sethi from the University of Cambridge. And he's going to be talking about a bioacoustics topic, but it will also include details of, I think, of cool recording devices and cool AI techniques. So of massive interest to quite a lot of people here, I think. So Sarah, over to you.
Great, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. Get my screen sharing. That all good?
Yeah, that's grand.
All right, brilliant. So today, I'm going to talk to you about my research, which is specifically around sort of fully automated or fully autonomous forms of eco-acoustic monitoring. And that is monitoring the natural soundscapes in the environment for ecological purposes, monitoring biodiversity, monitoring ecological health, these kind of things. And during it, we'll sort of cover some case studies which sort of vary from tropical forests to like the Nordic region to Scandinavia. So yeah, it's a bit of quite a wide array of topics covered and study areas, but keep track. Okay. So let's just like why do we even need to use acoustics in ecology? Like, what's the purpose? Well, traditional ecological monitoring. Traditional ecological monitoring is pretty laborious. It looks something like this, right? This is probably a bit of a hammed up example, but people go into a forest, look around with binoculars, they see, I've seen this bird, write it down on a piece of paper and you get back. You get great data, right? You want to know exactly what the birds, which birds are where. You can tell, you know, the sex of the bird, you can tell their breeding status, you can tell abundance, how many of them there are versus whether they're just there or not. So it's great data, but it's pretty labor intensive and it's quite difficult to scale. So acoustic monitoring has been used actually in ecology for, you know, many years before I even entered the field. And you guys might have sort of encountered the audio moth device. It's one of the most popular used devices. They're what I'd call semi-autonomous. You sort of put a recorder out, you come back in a week or so, maybe a month if you're lucky, to pick up your data off an SD card, replace the batteries, and then you sort of repeat. And so, you know, it's you can collect 24/7 data for the week that they're out, but it doesn't necessarily, again, scale terribly well if you want to look at years of data, or if you want to look across large extent, you know, with these regular maintenance visits. And in addition to this, the data, you know, comes in just massive amounts of WAV files on a SD card, and sort of where you go from there isn't clear, and how to sort of analyze that all efficiently is kind of an open question. So what we want to move towards is something more like this kind of idea of ideal ecosystem monitoring, which is the sort of wish list is something that's fully autonomous in real time. So it's, you know, massively scalable in space and time. But also it gives you ecological data that is as valuable as, you know, the traditional sort of manual approach to like as we saw in the first. So this is going to be the sort of topics I'm going to cover today. So first I'm going to talk about monitoring infrastructure and devices, then I'll move on to some machine learning sort of insights we found of how to analyze soundscapes and using their fingerprints. Then a sort of a further application of that, soundscapes predict species occurrence. We'll go over quite a big monitoring project we got going that's called the Sound of Norway. And then finally, just a few sort of future directions that are quite exciting that I want to share and might sort of, you know, stimulate the discussion. So in 2018, we developed this Raspberry Pi based recorder. So, you know, in contrast to, say, the audio moth, where you go back and you pick up SD cards and replace batteries, we have here a Raspberry Pi that was connected to a solar panel and a rechargeable battery, has a 3G mobile internet connection with a dongle. And we use audio connected to the microphone, but we also showed how the same sort of device could be used with a camera. You know, like it's just a USB interface, so you could plug in whichever sensor that you want. But this was really targeted at being like off the shelf, low cost, anyone can make it. If you go to these websites, you can see the sort of how to put them all together step by step. It's very much an off the shelf solution to being able to leave out sensors for a long time and be able to collect large amounts of data autonomously. We then sort of deployed this device, or a few, like 14 of these devices, in the SAFE project, and this is the Safe Acoustics website. So I haven't actually put the link in, but if you just Google Safe Acoustics, there's this website here where you can scan across our network, which we had 14 recorders, some in virgin tropical forests, some in logged forests, some in oil palm plantations, and you can sort of listen to how the soundscape changes across them. So, you know, the website is very much sort of a public facing, communicate our science, but the big sort of breakthrough here was having the full pipeline of audio coming in, being analysed automatically, and then being sort of indexed and databased, and on like kind of quite large scales. I think we're talking about 20,000 hours of data in part of this sort of network over not a huge amount of time that was collected. Now this was all well and good, but the devices were very much off the shelf, and the computational infrastructure was very much sort of in-house built. And so it wasn't the most reliable thing. So to build off that, we got EPSRC, Impact Acceleration Account funding to take our idea and make it into a more sort of commercializable, reliable device and infrastructure. And so that's where Bugg came from, and that's what these devices are. So in contrast to the other thing that was a Raspberry Pi in a garden box, these are injection molded enclosures with a Raspberry Pi compute module inside with a few custom PCBs for, you know, the mobile modem, MEMS microphone. But really here the sort of stress was, how can we make something that is maybe a bit more expensive but way more reliable, that we could rely, that would stay out, be weatherproof, record data reliably, and also very easy to use, like to configure. You know, the last one, you needed to be pretty handy with a Linux shell to configure it and all these kinds of things, whereas with this, configurations are sort of done on a website and you load it in through an SD card. So users who are typically, you know, technicians on big projects where we're deploying these don't need to be so tech savvy. And this really is like where the Audio Moth did great, because it was a device that allowed you to do this with. So we're trying to sort of take their learnings of how to produce interfaces that ecologists who are not necessarily so technical but want to use this technology can use. And so, yeah, as I said, it's not just the devices, but it's also this whole backend that we built, which is based on Google Cloud Services. And this is sort of ingesting audio, analysing it in real time. So no detection or any triggering is done on the edge. All audio is compressed to VBR0, uploaded over a mobile internet connection, and then analyses are done in the cloud. And then there's this web dashboard where, again, you can go and see sort of the status of recorders, whether they're actually uploading, what detections are being found, listen to them. But really the key is you have this big export where you can export your detections and the clips. And so, you know, that's where your science starts, is when you've got the data that's analysed, and it sort of jumps around the whole having to implement a large parallelized analysis sort of database from scratch each time. So the web app, we haven't quite got to open sourcing yet, but we are committed to doing so. But the hardware, in terms of the 3D CAD designs for all the injection molding parts, full assembly, the firmware running on the compute module for, etc., they're all open source. So you can go to GitHub, Bugg resources project page, and you can find all of this. So if you're kind of entering into a project that's similar and you want to see what's been done, what we found, there's a whole documentation as well into the design process and stuff, so it could save you a bit of time. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to talking about soundscape fingerprints and what sort of analysis we started doing on the data that was coming in from these devices. So there's kind of two main approaches to analysing eco-acoustic data. The first is the most obvious one that people will instantly think of. A bird makes a stereotyped call. You have an algorithm that says, is that the bird or not? And then you get occurrence data like, yes, it's here, no, it's not there. And you can do this, you know, for a bird, great Argus, but you can do it for geckos and whatever, right? Like a whole load of species make stereotype calls. If you can listen for them, you get species occurrence. You get very ecologically relevant outputs. You know, this is very close to what the ornithologists in the first slide were doing by going out into the forest with binoculars. But it's quite difficult to build these models, and especially for species that are rare, cryptic, you know, it's like where there aren't, or even just a lot of species, we only have 3 or 4 recordings of them because they're an understudied region. So you can't typically get the whole species community or even the whole vocalizing species community from this. You can just do this common species quite well. Now, another option is to sort of use the acoustic feature option approach, which is you look at sort of aggregate features of, say, a minute of audio or a second of audio at the time, things like average volume, things like activity at different frequency bands, things like complexity, and these give you a number that summarizes the like activity in an audio file. What's quite nice is it integrates data from all of the vocalizing species, you know, and everything else. So every frog, every bird, every insect. You're not just throwing away whatever you don't find in the audio. So they're very scalable in that sense. However, you know, what activity at 100 hertz means in a tropical forest in Borneo might be completely different from what activity at 100 hertz means for a sort of Arctic boreal forest in Norway. So whilst in theory they're easily scalable, what they actually mean in practice is not always so straightforward. Well, so we thought instead of trying to use these sort of univariate measures of, sorry, I should say, we're going to tackle the sort of latter approach, like how we could do soundscape analyses. So with the former approach, you kind of get these numbers and people will try and correlate average volume 6.5 means that, and they'll fit a sort of line of best fit to biodiversity in their region and say 1 means there's about X diversity of animals, 6 means there's a 6 times larger diversity of animals, something like that, right? But we thought instead of trying to do this sort of like very simple univariate analyses, we could use more sort of up-to-date analysis tools such as deep learning convolutional neural networks to derive high-dimensional features of the audio, and then use this as a fingerprint. So rather than saying that your sort of your biodiversity lies on a single scale, it's actually a more of a machine learning problem here. So you have a forest that exhibits certain features that you fingerprint, train a model to then tell you what the ecosystem health is. Now, how do you get these features? The first thing you've got to do is label a bunch of audio data to make a general audio classification tool. And then from that, you take the last layer off and you get this sort of compressed version of a very good deep learned feature set for the audio. Like the details are far more numerous, and you can sort of look these up in the references down here with Gemeke and Herchel who developed it. But these features end up being highly descriptive. They're quite robust to noise because you can imagine they're trained on very large data sets to sort of differentiate or to be able to tell you how sounds sound in real life rather than sort of rather than coming from the analysis side up and saying the volume means this. It's saying what properties do we see in the sound, and what's lucky is that has already been done. So this is an acoustics research group, so I'm sure you guys have already seen and understand this far better, or could explain it far better than I just have. But the VGG-ish network from Google does this. They've got huge amounts of YouTube data to train their general purpose classification algorithm net. And so we've got very good descriptors of audio for free from this work. Now, kind of like, great, you've got good descriptors, but how do we know they're actually capturing ecologically relevant patterns? So that's what we did in this paper in PNAS in 2020. And we took audio from 2 different areas in tropical Malaysia, Indonesia, Republic of Congo, some temperate forests in the US and New Zealand. And these are just unsupervised UMAP dimensional attitude reductions of all the data we put in. And we said, you know, in the like, look, it's quite obvious that the tropical regions are separating from the temperate regions. There's quite a broad scale kind of look at it, but good, the sort of first order of Malaysia is near Malaysia and USA is near USA. Like, we're getting sort of good spatial representation of our acoustic features. But perhaps the more interesting numbers that I'm going to show down here, and they are the typical way people want to use these soundscape features is to predict something ecologically relevant about the environment. So we did a classification task using the acoustic features to predict the site that these came from. And with these features, we got 89% classification accuracy, whereas with the old sort of set of soundscape indices, you're getting about 67%. there's a really big jump by using these learned features over the sort of previous set soundscape indices that were more entropy based or frequency based. Here's a more like ecologically relevant example, and this was in a tropical forest in Sabah, actually the SAFE project, and we sort of separated sites by whether they were low above ground biomass, mid above ground biomass, high, which is a good sort of proxy for degradation on this sort of particular gradient. And again, you could predict the above ground biomass window of each site with really high accuracy. So this is saying you could put a recorder out at a new site and you could guess what the quality of the forest is, which is really, you know, what people want to be using this for. Because if you set up a 10-year monitoring experiment, you want to see sort of as forests change from different healths, and these are like the really sort of impactful uses of the soundscape method and acoustic data. Just to show the other sort of quite big ecological patterns were represented. So this is about 4 years of data from a temperate forest in Ithaca from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And here we just, again, it's a completely unsupervised dimensionality reduction. We just coloured the points after it's been put down. And you can see January is down here, February goes up to March, and then summer months around there. And so over 4 years, you get this repeated cycling. And so, you know, everyone knows that the species communities changes really seasonally, but it's good to see that this data, the acoustic data, is reflecting what we intuitively know about the ecosystem. And we're getting this all, as I said, again, like, you know, it's completely for free. It's autonomously, there's no training data that's been collected specifically for this region, but we're tracking sort of phenological patterns in vocalizing communities in these areas. And again, the sort of predictive power we have over the current methods is quite significant. Sort of turns a problem that was sort of a chance to way better. And finally, diurnal patterns. We saw this in every single data set we saw, but we looked at, but here nighttime hours are there. As we get to green, you see there's a dawn chorus and there's a big jump in the soundscape over to the daytime hours, and then at the end of the sort of day you get to dusk and there's a big jump about sort of 5, 6, 7 p.m. back to nighttime. So the different vocalizing communities in the day and night are represented again in this completely unsupervised way, but if you wanted to use it to predict the species community at different times of day, you could do this with quite good accuracy. I kind of like a thing that nicely falls out of characterizing sounds in this highly descriptive way is that it gives you a good anomaly detection regime. So a normal, what you can do is you can take 5 days of audio and put them in this 128 dimensional feature space, and you can build a PDF with a Gaussian mixture model, which is what these blue sort of ovals are representing, is like the centers of your mixture model. And then you can say anything that falls outside of this PDF, significantly outside, is quite an anomalous sound. And it's sort of unsupervised anomaly detection, which is quite nice. It's going to tell you about what sounds are very rare in your study system or unexpected. Particularly sort of good case study why you might want to do this is, say, chainsaws. Say there's illegal logging going on in a lot of these tropical forest areas, and knowing, you know, to build, sure, you could build a sort of detection algorithm for chainsaws or guns, but if someone uses a different chainsaw or a different gun, it's not always going to come out as your detection mode might be quite brittle. However, chainsaws are very different sounds to whatever you're totally used to be expecting in your tropical forest. And as we can see, we did playback experiments with chainsaws at different distances from the recorder. And this black line is showing you the anomaly score by second. And this is really peaking up quite high. So you could implement this. And these are so sort of to what level the anomaly score is on a log scale. So you can see chainsaws, gunshots, the kind of things that are very anomalous, very different, but also very important to be detecting in your soundscape are coming out as highly anomalous. And these are, you know, signs of illegal activity. So that's one application for how you might want to use this kind of anomaly detection regime. But what you can also do is you can look at the centers of your soundscape, and that really helps you to understand what the most common sounds are. So it's just exploring this sound in a quite complete way by using this noise robust embedding, I guess. Here's like a little study we did on using these soundscapes to predict species occurrence. So previously we're talking a lot about using the soundscapes to predict community patterns as a whole, you know, over seasons, over different landscape types and things like this. But here we're going to tackle exact species occurrence, so whether species A is here or not. So you might say, why bother? Why not just use vocalizer detection if you're looking for a species? And the first answer is not all species vocalize. So what we want to try and use is a soundscape as an indicator of whether species are there or not. And that it's not just limited to vocalizing species. There might be certain ant species or whatever, right? So if you think of your soundscape as quite as a like habitat quality indicator, right? It's integrating a lot of information from lots of different vocalizing species. It's probably quite informative about species that aren't vocalizing or other aspects of the ecosystem. Another reason is there's not training data for a lot of the important and quite rare species. And finally, even if there are even if there are recordings, annotations and developing these models is quite laborious. So this sort of serves as an alternate way to use to try and derive species occurrence. So how do we do it? Similar to in the anomaly detection thing, what we did is we took all the audio where we knew a species was present. Now, again, this is like on a quite coarse scale, so 20-minute clips of audio we're talking, rather than 5 seconds of a species vocalizing. We're not looking at species vocalizations. So we build a Gaussian mixture model that gives us a PDF of the soundscape features where the species is present. And then similarly, we do that with species absent. So this is based on point count data, where someone's gone out, recorded audio, looked around for a species, and they've seen it or not seen it. And that gives us this quite coarse level label data. And then we derive our confidence of whether there's a species there or not as just the log likelihood difference. So you're given X, which is the new soundscape feature, and you put it in those two PDFs, you look at the difference, and that gives you the odds of whether the species is there or not. And we found that worked quite well. So here is 3 different species, again, from the SAFE project in Malaysian Borneo. In blue is we did a sort of leave one out cross-validation task to get to these predictions of whether a species was present in the soundscape or not. And then red is the true occurrence of whether the species was actually seen in that area at that time or not. And so you see there's quite a high degree of agreement between the predictions from the soundscape and whether the species was there or not. And what's quite nice as well is it worked for the sites are on this axis, and they're ordered from like low above ground biomass to high above ground biomass. So you've got oil palm at the top and you've got old growth forest at the bottom. So for species that thrive in degraded landscapes that are diurnal, this is the yellow vented bulbul, work well for species that are only seen at dawn choruses and primarily in more sort of intact forests, the sooty capped babbler, that worked very well as well as for nocturnal species that are almost seen at every site. So the soundscape's quite informative across a whole range of different types of species, because you're picking up on these coarse level changes in the soundscape. You're not actually too interested in what exactly the soundscape is at the time, so it's not overfit to any one type of soundscape. This is quite an interesting sort of finding as well. Is like what determined, not all species work brilliantly. Here's the AUC per species, and some of them, quite poor. We're down around 0.5, so pretty much chance. On the y-axis, what we've got is a measure of how temporally stereotyped these species occurrence patterns were. So you can see over here, the species was never seen at night. It's always during the daytime hours, and here it's always seen in dawn chorus time, but never, or very rarely at other hours. And this gives us some intuition. So the more temporally grouped the occurrences are, the better prediction accuracy we're able to get. And what this indicates is that our soundscape prediction of occurrence are basically just picking up on diurnal cycles or diurnal patterns in the data that are quite strong, quite leading order, especially in tropical forests. So it gives you an idea, if you want to extend this to different species, which ones it might work for. Whereas you can imagine if these red dots were randomly spread through all of here, your soundscape wouldn't be terribly predictive. It's they're just free roaming animals that sometimes here, sometimes there, and so your soundscape's not going to be such a good predictor of whether it's there. And also just a so what, or what's the point? We compared the predictions of occurrence with a model that was based on LiDAR data from a drone that flew over the same forest, and so you say essentially here what you're picking up on is a habitat suitability indicator. Could you not just get that by looking at the structure of the forest? But actually, the predictions from the soundscape model were significantly better than the predictions from this LiDAR model. So there is still, and I think mainly that's due to the ability to pick up on these temporal patterns, whereas, LiDAR data giving you forest structure is going to be static in time, pretty much, on the scales that we're talking, at least diurnal. But we're able to get sort of closer to the actual biodiversity of what's going on, and the predictions were better. Yeah, so now I'm going to talk about a sort of pilot big project we've got going, which is called the Sound of Norway project. So the kind of idea right at the start for the Sound of Norway project was to have audios particularly well scalable as a form of monitoring. National monitoring programs in most countries, they exist and they have different goals. Like there'll be one that puts out insect traps, or another that puts out camera traps to look at small mammals, and they're all quite disparate types of sampling regimes in different areas. But with audio, we hope we can get at least a few species of interest to most of these different monitoring programs. So what we wanted to do was create a network that had many locations which are just audio recording, but also many which are overlapping with existing data points to allow us to sort of do this, or give us some training data essentially to infer species occurrences and species patterns beyond the extent of the current networks. So the sort of case study that was started with is TOVI, which is Norway's breeding bird survey, and over there, what they do is they go once a year based on kind of the date is variable.
Sarab, I'm showing you as muted.
Where did I cut off? Oh, you're on mute, Bill.
Sorry, I muted myself just 30 seconds ago at most.
Okay, sorry about that. I think when I moved the indicator, it okay, let me go back to this. You got me again?
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
So I'll go back to the sound. Well, sort of what we're doing with the TOVI project, which is it's the National Breeding Bird Project in Norway, and so they're interested in sort of charting the breeding birds and the migratory birds, and they go out one date in spring, but what they really lack is any sort of information on how the breeding birds abundance occurrence varies, from March through April through May through the breeding season, and how these timings vary for different species and vary from different latitudes, right from the south of Norway to right to the north of Norway. So what we want to do is be able to produce this, provide them with this temporal data. But I think what's really important is to also mention it's very much like to complement their studies, because what they are able to do is what we currently can't do with state-of-the-art eco-acoustic tools, which is pick out things like how many birds there are, or what breeding stage they're in, or something to do with the sort of the size of the bodies and stuff that might give you some indication of fitness of the animals. So it's very much they could provide data that we're never going to be able to provide all the data that they are able to get. However, we can pick up on this angle that is going to be valuable to them to understand phenological sort of patterns, and most importantly, actually sort of how this responds to climate change, as we see different timings of insects coming out and fruiting trees, and etc. And what's quite nice as well with this project is because it's being hosted at the Norwegian Institute of Nature Research, we work quite closely with the Norwegian Environment Agency. So it's very much like I've talked a lot so far about very in-depth technological development of the hardware and the analyses, but this time it really is like there's a link to impact in land management and policy, which has been quite an illuminating experience, to say it really. So over 2021 and 2022, we deployed, in 2021, we deployed 40 odd units and similar number in 2022. And devices were put out, you know, for everywhere. So forests in mid-Norway to sort of forest. We were focusing on forest areas actually last year, although we had some semi-natural grasslands this year with sticking to forests. But this is, you know, well inside the Arctic Circle, and this picture I think was actually taken on the 1st of May, so it gives you some idea for how far north these places are. And we wrote a report on our findings to the Environment Agency. But you know, we found, I think what we're finding is the devices work well, the analyses work well. Just practicalities in managing a project on this size and this scale, sort of, you know, 40 devices isn't a huge amount, but over the whole sort of latitudinal extent of the country, there's quite a lot of getting permits, organisation and stuff that has taken up quite a lot of time and has required a bit of fine tuning. So the main analysis we've been running on the data right now is not any of the you know, soundscape stuff, but bird occurrence is what people really care about, and especially since we're overlapping with Toby, we need to show that we can add value to their project by giving them data on the occurrence, so whether the bird is present or absent in an area. So we ran the BirdNET algorithm, which is this like species vocalization detection algorithm developed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And what we did is once we ran it on all of our data, and then we took 50 detections from each species and sent it to an ornithologist who knows about these things, you know, to say, here's 50 detections of a barn swallow, is it actually a barn swallow or not? And in that way we can sort of measure precision of the algorithm per species. And what you can see is, you know, for 20 odd species it's 100% precise. Every time it said it was a yellowhammer, it was a yellowhammer. For some it was quite good, so 80% of the grey herons it said it was grey herons, and the rest were maybes or no's. But for some species, and these great bitterns have very like mechanical sounding calls, they were actually, you know, just a bunch of anthropogenic sounds like drills nearby or cars that were being mistaken as that species. But with this, it kind of gives us an idea of what species we can trust the algorithm for and which ones we can't, so we can get rid of a lot of noise from our data set. And this whole process, you know, takes not much more than a week of that person's time, but it means that we can then exploit the 100,000 hours of data that we've collected to get reliable biodiversity metrics out. So just a sort of quick overview of the kind of data we can get out. Here on the x-axis is the date, and this is from last year. We actually only started in July due to sort of practicality issues. And on the Y is site, so we're looking at avian richness per day at each site over a matter of 4 months, 3 months, that kind of time. So, you know, just massive amounts of data that we're getting for not much effort through the use of these automated approaches. And then here is like, actually within each site, we can tell you more than just the species richness. We can tell you exactly which species were there and not. You know, so this is like really valuable data that's going to tell you about community diversity, turnover, phenology of species, what date did they leave that area, and also competition, interspecies competition. You know, if you start looking at whether this species was always there and that one or not, you can understand how they're interacting maybe. And finally, just I'm going to sort of skim over a few future directions. So this essentially comes back to what you mentioned right at the start on measuring human disturbance from audio. So the initial motivation for this project was we're putting out recorders that are recording hundreds of thousands of hours of data. Obviously, there's going to be people who like come nearby and speak, and we need to give some assurance that we're not listening to this data. So the best way to do it is if you're able to really anonymize the data, you can detect all the errors of speech and delete them. And there are voice activity detection models that have been developed for years, you know, for Siri, Alexa, like your home assistants and all this, but they're not so good in quite complex soundscapes outdoors where you've got birds calling, you've got other sort of conflating sounds, and they've come up with quite a lot of false detections and misdetections for sort of speech in the distance. So we developed a VAD model, a voice activity detection model based on a CNN, and compared that to two state-of-the-art existing ones, PioNote and WebRTC. And you know, we found we could get an improved performance by doing things like data augmentation with birdsong and this, you can read all about the details of this. It's just out sort of a couple of weeks ago in Methods of Ecology and Evolution. But also interesting, it's not just an anonymisation thing, but here we put recorders out over a weekend near quite a popular hiking spot in Norway. And these orange dots are the bus timings for buses coming into and leaving that area. And we've got 2 lines showing relative detection frequencies for our EcoVAD, or one of the existing voice activity detection algorithms. But it shows that you can actually measure human pressure. You know, there's peaks in human speech nearer when the buses are there. So the bus is giving us some like ground truth proxy of actual human pressure or human occurrence in this area. But we're getting that as well through the speech detection. So you can imagine if you have this overlaid with a different graph looking at your birds, different bird species calling, you can start to understand whether birds are trying to avoid humans or whether more humans in certain areas is encouraging more birds, and vice versa. So like species human interactions can be picked up quite a lot in this way. And actually going forward, we're looking at detecting snow scooters, because that's an area of huge sort of policy importance in Norway, controlling where snow scooters can be driven, when, at what times, how loud they can be, and things like this. This is a recent sort of line started going down, which is how we can use biodegradable sensors actually to scale up sensing efforts even further. So biodegradable sensors are being developed in medical applications, where you can put in a sensor, an implant, it can measure something like your blood pressure around an artery, and then you leave it and it gets resorbed back into the body. But if we can use these sensors in ecology, there's a sort of vision where we can have drones dropping sensors which are relaying data back to either the drone or a receiver, but then they can just be left there. And then we can, you know, we can reach inaccessible regions which we can't currently go to. We can do sort of spatial resolutions of monitoring that we can't achieve right now, just because, you know, there is still labor associated with putting out recorders and picking them up and maintaining them. But yeah, it's kind of a vision for like a fully autonomous, really scalable ecological monitoring regime. And so we wrote a comment paper on this in Nature, Ecology and Evolution that came out a few months ago that I'd encourage you to read if you're interested in sort of background literature and what types of things we think we might be able to measure. And then this is like a sort of another moonshot kind of idea. It's like, talks a lot about sort of verifying things that you can already measure in person, like biodiversity, which birds are there, species competition, but maybe, you know, having such fine resolution time series on ecological states and health can tell us more intrinsic properties of the ecosystem, such as resilience. And this, you know, if you've seen it before, it's kind of obvious what I'm trying to get at, but it's like critical slowing down, the idea of tipping points, that you can predict tipping points from characteristic signals in a time series of a complex system. And yeah, that's something we're investigating, because that would really be, you know, a hugely impactful tool if we could put out audio monitoring devices through national park, say, and we could say 3 years and we could be like, well, this area is showing a lot of slowdown or correlations, or, you know, lower frequency fluctuations in the patterns of biodiversity we're seeing. Probably this might indicate that it's approaching a tipping point. Let's go and intervene before we reach that. An early warning signal. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So just thank you to all the academic collaborators for all the various different bits of work that we mentioned, field staff, and you for your time.
Thanks very much. That was a really fascinating talk, Sarah. Thanks.
Thanks.